We've got the video from Janet from New Zealand.
Kia ora everybody, I'm Janet. I'm the New Zealand country contact for the Women's Declaration International. The Women's Declaration, which has been signed by about 38,000 women, reaffirms the sex-based rights of women and girls, which are guaranteed by the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was known as CEDAW. We oppose all forms of discrimination against women and girls that result from replacing sex with gender identity in law, policy and social practice. We are very concerned that Germany's Self-ID Act, the Gender Self-Determination Act, SPGG, is violating the human rights of women and girls, which are laid out in international law, in particular CEDAW and the Istanbul Convention Against Violence Against Women, which Germany has signed up to, both of those. CEDAW opposes discrimination based on sex. The rights of women in CEDAW are sex-based. These rights are being undermined by concepts of gender coming into law, such as in sex self-ID legislation. Today in Germany, an extreme piece of sex self-ID legislation constituting a very serious attack on women's rights comes into force. This is a setback for women in Germany and across the world. It reflects similar attacks on women's rights around the world, including in Australia and New Zealand. Recently, New South Wales became the last state in Australia to introduce sex self-ID. Some states in Australia have draconian laws equaling the severity of the German law, making it impossible for women to gather in same-sex spaces or to tell the truth about biological sex. The German law is potentially worse than New Zealand's sex self-ID law, the Births, Deaths, Marriages and Relationships Registration Act of 2021, which at least recognises that the birth certificate can no longer be relied upon as evidence of someone's sex. The German law is so extreme that parents can put whatever gender they like on the birth certificate for a child from birth to 5 years age. I can't begin to imagine the psychological harm that this could cause. A person can be fined €10,000 for disclosing what somebody's biological sex is. So if a person's sex or original name cannot be disclosed, that means that criminals and sex offenders will be able to disguise their identities, putting women and children at risk, and women will be silenced from speaking out against sex-based violence. So as I said, Germany has ratified CEDAW and the Istanbul Convention for protection of women from sex-based violence. And Germany also has protections for women in its constitution. And this new law risks violating all of those conventions and protections. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Reem Al-Salem, sent a 17-page letter to the government of the Federal Republic of Germany, addressed to the Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, in which she described her great concerns about human rights threat to women and girls posed by the Self-ID Act, and she demanded statements as to how Germany would continue to guarantee the rights and safety of women and girls. Reem Al-Salem also reminded the German federal government of its obligations under these international rights law to protect children, girls and women based on sex. In particular, Reem Al-Salem noticed the following rights and the following threats to these rights. 1, the right to be free from discrimination and violence. 2, increased risks of violence against women and the associated trauma that comes with that. 3, undermining single-sex spaces for females. 4, lack of trauma-informed approach for women and girls who are victims or survivors of violence. Number 5, the obligation to collect sex-based data in statistics. 6, the negative impact on women and girls' higher standards of mental and physical health. She particularly noted the risks of puberty blockers for children, as outlined in the CAS report. 7, the lack of safeguards for the best interests of the child, which are outlined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly concerning girls. 8, the risks of freedom of expression, religious freedom, and the risk to prevention of violence due to the ban on disclosure. Because if we can't say what someone's real sex is, then we can't protect women against violence from men when we can't admit that they are men. Reem Al-Salim concludes by expressing her great concern about the negative consequences that the new law would have on the rights of women and girls. She reminded the federal government that as a state party to CEDAW, it will be held accountable if it does not take all appropriate measures to prevent, investigate, prosecute, punish, and provide redress for acts or omissions by state and non-state actors that lead to gender-based violence against women. Violence against women is recognised as discrimination against women, so allowing it to happen is actually contributing to discrimination against violence. She noted particularly the risks of violence towards women prisoners who are forced to share cells with male inmates. And also, violence against women is inherent in prostitution, which has been legal in Germany for 20 years. The Special Rapporteur asked the German government to explain what steps it would take to address these concerns. She received a very short, meaningless reply which evaded all of the questions. And I note that the German ambassador has tried to reply a little bit more, even though none of her responses are any good to the letter that Speak Up for Women sent her. But at least she did seem to put a bit more detail in than what the German government gave to Reem Al-Salim. Anyway, Reem notices also, Reem Al-Salim, that the word Geschlecht in the German Self-Determination Act is understood to refer to both sex and gender, as German law does not make a distinction between them and uses the same word to denote both. She says this prevents a sensitive approach to issues pertaining both to sex and to gender. Under United Nations law, until recently, has always recognised that sex is about biological sex, whereas gender is about the social constructs and expectations which reinforce a hierarchy of men over women. CEDAW calls for the elimination of these sex-based stereotypes. We have seen the conflation of sex and gender happening in other countries too, where the word gender has often been used as a polite term for sex, and then eventually it came to replace sex altogether, thereby eroding the recognition of the reality of sex and sex-based rights. German women have been speaking out against this harmful and misogynist piece of legislation, but their voices have only been ignored by the government. Instead, the government have paid attention to the co-opted women's and human rights organisations who have supported it. We see the same pattern happening here in New Zealand. Undeterred, the group Last Frauen Sprechen, apologies for my pronunciation, has called for international solidarity and for us all to gather today at German embassies around the world to protest this threat to us all. Ina Wagner, the founder of Last Frauen Sprechen, said on a Women's Declaration International webinar in September, "We want the so-called gender identity to be removed from all laws because self-ID harms women's rights. They should be removed from the EU, UN and laws in all countries. Let's protest together all over the world against the arrogance and hypocrisy of misogynist politics on November the 1st, starting at 12:05. So this is exactly what we're doing. Yay! And here we are. And now I'd like to read out a message of solidarity from Ina Wagner to all of us who are here today. This is what she says. Hang on. This is her message. Dear sisters, I would like to tell you how the idea for this international campaign came about. It was born out of the anger at the politicians that I have developed in 3 years of demos against self-ID. The politicians don't hear us. Are we too quiet? Then we should unite our voices and send a call to the whole world. In this case, United Women's Voices are directed at the German politicians who have passed one of the worst self-ID laws to protect the lie that sex can be changed. But politicians in other countries around the world also act as if they don't know what a woman is and abolish women's rights. So I came up with the idea of asking women in other countries if they would demonstrate in front of the German embassies. I thought hopefully there will be 3 to 5 crazy women who will do something in 1 to 3 countries. And we made a great discovery. The world is full of crazy women. We have solidarity support from 22 countries, and in some countries, several protests have been announced. This is an example of women's power that inspires us all. We are the grassroots. We can only rely on ourselves, on women at grassroots level. Because the big organisations like UN Women, which were once supposed to protect us, women have betrayed us. They have betrayed our trust and even sold our word woman and smuggled this damn gender identity into our protective laws behind our backs. That's why grassroots women are now taking over. Women rise because self-ID harms all women and girls around the world. Dear sisters in New Zealand, we are endlessly grateful to you and are thinking of you at our rally. You are the first on the planet today, November 1st, to take this action. The spark of this women's solidarity will fly from you across the planet today and inspire women from country to country. Thank you for this incredible experience of solidarity. Ina, coordinator of Las Vrouwensprechen.
Thank you.